Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to this symposium on population pressure and the health of the Chesapeake Bay. My name is Bob Lawrence. I direct the Center for a Livable Future here at the Bloomberg School of Public Health and am a professor in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences. We have been involved, all of us in this room who live in the Chesapeake watershed, with contributing to the problem that we're going to address today. My wife and I are immigrants to the watershed from New York City 15 years ago. We own a car. We drive around. We consume. And I think I could echo that for everybody. Tom Horton arrived on his bicycle, and I do commute by bicycle, but I recognize that that's a small part of reducing my own footprint on the Bay ecosystem. We also know and appreciate that the Bay ecosystem is in peril. It has been essentially almost on life support for the last couple of decades, a little step forward here and then steps back. Pollution from the large industrial food animal production facilities, especially the poultry industry on the eastern shore. Growing human population throughout the watershed, and of course, steady increase in the amount that we each of us consume and put pressure on the environment. We're really privileged today to have three very distinguished speakers to address different pieces of this puzzle. And then at the end, Stan Becker, demographer and professor in our Department of Population and Family Health Sciences, and I will lead a discussion about what we do to address the specific issues of population. And so we want to be open and frank in our discussions. We want to try as best we can to avoid the restraints of politically correct speech while at the same time being respectful. So I hope you're all prepared to come and absorb some new information and then to really contribute from your own thinking about these issues. Brad Hefner is going to lead off. Brad has been the State Director of Environment Maryland since its spinoff from Maryland PIRG in 2006. And Brad, when I was reading about that, reminded me that many years ago when one of my nieces, who's now a professor of environmental science at the University of Virginia, was working for MassPIRG, and I hadn't heard of MassPIRG, although I lived in Massachusetts. And it sounded like some effort to clean out the corrupt politicians. So maybe there is some connection there anyway, but we're delighted that you're here to share with us what the issues are from the point of view of the overall environment. And if I can bring up your slide set, we'll have you come up and get us started. And why is this not? Mia? Mia set this up so it would be foolproof, and now we've shown what a fool I am. There you go.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. Thank you for coming and for inviting me here. It's a privilege to be part of this important discussion. I'm Brad Hefner, State Director of Environment Maryland. I have been on this job basically for the past 7 years here in Maryland. Worked a lot on energy issues and global warming, both curbing current sources of air pollution and promoting clean energy sources. In the past several years, I've worked more and more on the Chesapeake Bay, and so that is roughly half of the work that Environment Maryland does. We do clean energy in the Chesapeake Bay. So probably a lot of you know more about the population issue per se than I do. I haven't ever, run a campaign on it. And obviously, I've been keeping tabs and thinking about it all my life, and especially as an environmental organizer. But I'm interested to learn some here as well. In terms of where the bay is at, I mean, the big question is, can we truly restore the Chesapeake Bay given the growing population, the projections for future growth in the Chesapeake Bay watershed? Does that just trump everything, and we're not going to be able to really get a clean bay because of that? And how much of a factor has it been so far? I remember the first thing I did when I moved to Maryland in 2003, it was kind of funny. I threw our organization a 30th year anniversary celebration. So it was kind of odd. I was brand new, and then talking about the great achievements of our group. But that was the timing, and I was in charge of putting together this event. And the keynote speaker of that event was Tom Horton, who's going to speak a little later. And I remember distinctly him saying, well, the bay is not getting a lot better, but we're holding steady, and given the growing population, that's quite an achievement. And obviously, we need to do a lot more. So I think that's very interesting to take to heart. But then it still leaves the question: can we do it with this growing population? If you look, first off, here's over time, the red line, how much pollution, and they were talking about nitrogen. The biggest problem in the Chesapeake Bay is nitrogen and phosphorus creating a dead zone in the bay in the middle of the summer. The nutrients fuel algae blooms, algae dies, and sucks up all the oxygen, and sea critters like you and I need oxygen to survive. So about a third of the bay, up to a third of the bay each summer, is a dead zone. It's because there's too much nitrogen and phosphorus. If you look at nitrogen going down over time, the purple line being the goal of the sustainable amount of nutrients that the bay can handle. I would mention here, this is modeling by the Chesapeake Bay program led by the EPA, and there are many of us who question the model, who say they're giving credit for reductions that aren't real. So the downward slope of that red curve is probably somewhere between half as steep and almost as steep. It's hard to know how off that model might be, but particularly in the agricultural sector, they think that there are reductions happening that probably really aren't. So I would think in all, we're less close to that purple line than this graph would show, but there's no question where the total nitrogen pollution has been going down throughout the water. This is for the entire watershed here, these numbers. You can see that sewage treatment plants are going down gradually because we've invested a lot of money in upgrading our sewage treatment plants with modern technology. And then agriculture is not on here. That's obviously the other big one. But the one thing you'll notice is going in the wrong direction with an upward curve is urban runoff. And it's a smaller piece of the pie, but it's growing. And it's very difficult to address because we've built so much concrete and structures, and it's hard to retrofit that in ways that capture rainwater and keep the polluted runoff from getting into the streams in the Chesapeake Bay. An extremely expensive proposition. We have passed rules saying that new development has to use a lot of good design techniques to minimize runoff, but the existing development is very hard to retrofit. So that's going to be hard to get a handle on, and as our population grows, that's going to be even more of a problem. So policy-wise, in terms of what we're doing right now to clean up the bay, President Obama signed an executive order in May of last year for a stronger federal role in Chesapeake Bay restoration. And he directed the EPA to come up with new science-based pollution limits and gave the states in the watershed a deadline for coming up with an enforceable plan to meet those new pollution limits. Basically, what the Clean Water Act said we should have done 35 years ago, and it's never been enforced, it's never really happened. But the EPA now is holding the states' feet to the fire to actually do that. The numbers are coming out on the new pollution limits, and the states are coming up with their plans. The first draft was due a couple weeks ago on September 1st. And so we have some draft plans that are out there, and by the end of this year, they need to be finalized. The first draft of the plan is kind of a menu of options, just saying, here are all the things that we're going to fill out the details on later. And those over the next 4 months, they're going to have to really work those details out. But how, so can we do enough to really get to that sustainable level of pollution? Well, for Maryland, I haven't studied the other states, but I've studied Maryland's draft plan. And there's a lot in there, and it seems like if we do all the things they're suggesting that they have on the menu of options, yes, we know what it'll take. We know how to reduce the pollution enough. Question is, it'll take a lot of money. You know, upgrading more sewage treatment plants, retrofitting more existing impervious surface, and getting farmers to change the way they do business. All of it will take money. So it's very difficult to know how achievable it is from a practical standpoint. From a scientific standpoint, we do know what it'll take. And then how is growth factored into here? Well, there are two different ways. One is that the plan has to account for future growth, saying, you know, that projecting out to 2020, are the measures you're proposing going to do enough? Well, you have to take into account that there are going to be more people there, clearly. And then also, you have to offset the new population so that with the increased population, increased development, you need to offset the impacts of that development by doing measures elsewhere to reduce pollution. So this is the Maryland Department of Planning predicts, as part of this process, that we're going to add 260,000 households. You often hear 1 million people over the next 10 years. But this, for the Bay planning, they're talking about this number of households in the next 10 years. That's going to have an impact, clearly. So offsetting this, again, we know what to do, but it'll be expensive. And then that obviously doesn't get to the underlying problem. They're talking about offsetting the negative impacts, not having the negative impacts, not preventing this growth in the number of people that are going to be in the watershed, but just accounting for them and counteracting their impact. Seems like a big deal, right? It makes you wonder. So the credit system they have is there's 3 tiers of credits, that if you're building a new development, a little neighborhood development, if it's smart growth oriented, it's connected to a sewer system with state-of-the-art technology on sewage treatment, and it's you know, compact growth, you only need a certain number of credits that you have to purchase in order to get approval to make that development. If it's sprawl on septics that is going to have a bigger pollution impact, then you have to buy more credits in order to get approval to build that. This is the idea for the state plan, the way that they're planning to go about it. Is it good enough? Is it really going to work? And is it really going to be good enough? Those are open questions. But then the question is, you know, what do you do? If you want to do more than this, how would you actually limit the number of people that are going to be living in this watershed? And that, again, is no easy question. We certainly have heard a lot about the Chinese one-child policy, both for public education, and in there some very stronger measures. It seems not quite achievable here or desirable. But then let's look at what some of the existing environmental organizations who do work on this issue are doing. The Sierra Club is one of them. Sierra Club, more than any other environmental organization, has worked on population issues directly. The other one is National Audubon Society, and I think National Wildlife Federation was part of this effort, although they may no longer be. You can see that most of their effort has been international family planning, the global impact, and having both family planning services and education and economic opportunity for women in less developed nations. That's where most of this effort has gone, federal lobbying to get more money overseas for family planning and empowering women. The more that women have the ability to have economic opportunity and good education, the smarter they'll be about family planning. And also children's health. The more the more confident you are that your children are going to survive, the less you'll want to overcompensate and have a lot of children. So those are the efforts that have happened to some success, clearly not as much success as the advocates would want. And then these have been big coalition efforts led not by the environmental groups, but by the groups that work more directly on population. Population Action International and the Population Reference Bureau are the two biggies that they've been working on this for a long time and running big campaigns, and they have a lot of involvement both from environmental groups and from women's groups and from others. There are other groups. CARE is mostly a global anti-poverty group, but plays very strongly in this coalition. Californians for Population Stabilization is the only state-based organization that I know of that works directly on population. However, their agenda is completely about anti-immigration, stopping immigrants from coming across the California border, and very strong. Their rhetoric is very strong on the anti-immigrant side of things. So, could these be more focused locally? Could we do regional or state or regional campaigns, or even national campaigns? Because still, most of this is international, talking about global population growth. The one thing that has been in play quite a bit is Title X. And this is created by President Nixon to fund access to family planning services, mostly for women in low economic low economic communities. And then, so the fight has been, let's put more money in this. It's certainly helped give a lot of people access to services, but never as much as you want. And I think recently there have been strong cutbacks. So, from a national perspective, that seems to be where the effort has been, at least from the Sierra Club and perhaps the Audubon Society as well. Could we do the same thing here? Could we have a regional or a statewide initiative to fund better family planning services for the sake of the Chesapeake Bay? That's the question. Hasn't happened. The thing that we have spent a lot of time on is so-called smart growth initiatives, right? I have a love-hate relationship with the term smart growth. I mostly hate it, largely because it's been so co-opted. There's so much bad growth that happens in the name of smart growth that you hate to be a booster of smart growth and see all this growth happen. And also, it's not the point. Sure, you want growth to be a little smarter, but you want to also limit growth. But people get it. People understand what you're talking about with smart growth, and it avoids the criticism of just being anti-growth. And it's the first thing that a lot of people say when we're talking about smart growth. Our opponents in the policy debates will say, oh, you're just anti-growth, you're anti-economic development, you environmental people would be happier if there were no growth. And, that's certainly not true in terms of economic, a strong economy. I'm, a Marylander like the rest of you. I want a very strong economy. But then it brings in the question of growth for growth's sake. Is that sustainable? Well, clearly not in the long run. But how are we ever going to bust through that? What's the economic model for a strong economy that's not based on growth? I haven't heard of it, and I'd love for somebody who understands that better than me to sit down and explain it to me, how we can have those measures be the standard measures for economic prosperity without growth for growth's sake. So we end up often working for smart growth. You go on our website, I'm sure it's all over there, smart growth. Because we're running campaigns, we're trying to win specific policy initiatives, and it just works better using that rhetoric. So we have defaulted and done that. Can we, in the end, sort of bust the overall paradigm and say, we need to go beyond growth? I would love to, but it's not the sort of thing that we normally would do. We're a campaign-oriented organization looking for real results in the near term. You do sort of wonder, is it too late? Right? If we were to do, you're probably all familiar with this curve, the population growth over time, the red line, it's pretty scary looking, right? And at some point, we do meet the carrying capacity of the Earth. There's only so much food we can grow. And there's only so much clean water. At some point, globally, we bump up against that. So those pressures are going to be far more effective at limiting population growth than family planning services. But then you look at I'm curious to hear what other people think about that. I think in the local level, this is a little less relevant because there is more room for growth in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. More people could move here and get by. In the end, I think the thing that's really going to make the difference is the cost of living, right? As water becomes more scarce and fuel becomes more scarce, we hit the peak oil curve and living is more expensive. It's going to happen, and it's going to be more difficult to have a large family. I think that, in the end, is going to be the limiting factor. But if we can be smart and take proactive measures before we hit the carrying capacity, that would certainly be much better, both for the planet and for our own well-being. So then the sort of reality check on what environmental groups are able to do, and I should say citizen-based groups more than environmental groups, because there are a range of nonprofit advocacy groups, there are a range of environmental groups. Environment Maryland is one that is very grassroots oriented, right? We are as much about mobilizing people and engaging citizens in political debates as we are about passing these policy measures. And that's sort of the way we do pass the policy measures. There are some groups that are foundation funded and more academic oriented and are advisors and experts in the policy debates, and they help get things done by their expertise. Environment Maryland and many other citizen-based groups are ones that help get things done by citizen pressure. And so we need to be able to have our campaigns be easy to explain to people and have it make sense to people in a very quick, intuitive way. We knock on 70,000 doors around Maryland every summer, and with a 4-sentence statement. And we very carefully craft those 4 sentences. Who we are, what's the problem, what's the solution, what we want you to do. Right? It has to be just straightforward and quick, and people need to nod immediately. Right? As soon as they kind of twist their head and say, "Really?" then they're not going to jump in and say, "Yeah, we'll support you. How do I get involved?" So it needs to be easy to explain, and even the smart growth stuff. We want to, make growth have less impact on the environment. We want to protect the Chesapeake Bay by making sure development has less environmental impact. It's not a complicated concept, right? But it's still 3 steps of logic, and it's harder to sell to people. We're going to sign up less people to get involved in our work if we have something that takes 3 steps of logic and is a little harder to explain than something that's very straightforward. Wind power, clean energy, environmental benefit. Nobody questions it, right? And even global warming, I'm sad to say, is less of a quick sell than it used to be, because there are all these questions about ClimateGate, and there's all these, it's long range, it's not immediate. And so in terms of being able to recruit people, it's not just getting members or getting activists to sign the postcard or getting people to agree to come to your event and volunteer hours. It's also recruiting volunteers, recruiting staff. Recruitability is a concept we talk about. So it needs to be something that people are charged up about for the type of organization that we are. And so again, it needs to be something that people feel that they can make a difference on. I used to develop campaigns on campaign finance reform. Obviously a very important issue, right? And most people agree it's a very important issue. But our experience was you go to people and talk to them, we're working on campaign finance reform to get money out of politics, will you help us? The dominant reaction was, God bless you, son, good luck to you. Don't expect me to be involved. You had trust that you're going to make one whit of difference. So again, this is why we need to have straightforward and winnable, easy to explain campaigns, and why for Environment Maryland, in terms of our work on the Chesapeake Bay right now, and most environmental groups, this is pretty straightforward, pretty easy to explain. What we're talking to people about right now is factory farming, and the ways to limit pollution from the 300 million chickens that are grown in Maryland every year. You want to talk about a population problem. 300 million chickens produce a lot of waste that is the biggest factor in the dead zone in the Chesapeake Bay. And you don't have to tell people twice. People know this, and they're ready to rally with you. And so in terms of the short-term campaign-oriented activity, that is going to be more effective use of our hours. But then the question still is, can it be done? Can we somehow develop some coordinated campaign in the Chesapeake Bay region that talks directly about population? I think so. But it would have to be led by a foundation-funded outfit that is, not out there relying on people power and citizen involvement to get things done. Because, I'll tell you what, I work overtime already just barely keeping the organization together when I'm picking the most winnable and easy to sell and, bang for the buck campaigns. The more we start picking harder campaigns, it's just not viable for a citizen-funded organization. But for a foundation-funded organization, it's possible. I would expect that there are foundations that would be willing to invest in this sort of work, and then organizations like ours and others, could lend a hand. So we can go to our members now and then on something that's not immediate and and obvious, and ask them to be involved. We can't base the whole organization around it, but we can do it from time to time and be part of a coalition effort and help out. So those are my thoughts. I'm happy to answer questions after the other panelists, but
we have time. Actually, we have time, Brad, for a few questions.
Okay.
Specifically for you, and then
great.
We'll have more time at the end. So thank you very much, Brad. Comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Brad, the first chart that you showed about nitrogen,
Yeah.
is kind of a technical question. The conclusions you draw from that chart are highly dependent on the validity of the target line. And that target line is probably somewhat uncertain. It may have been decided on the basis of some political decisions rather than strictly technical ones. So, can you comment on that? Although this is probably too technical a question for the purpose of this meeting.
It's an important question. The question is that target good enough? Are we really going to restore the bay if we get to that level? And yeah, I also do not have full confidence that we will. Can we get to that line? And if we do, is it good enough? Because yes, there are political pressures, but it's also regional. This is not just one bay number. That even if we were to meet this bay wide, there would be regional problems. First step is let's go with what the model says, and do all the steps we can take to get there. It's going to be, the EPA tells us it'll be 2017 before they revise the model. They want to go through this whole thing, this whole process of state plans, implementing phase 1 of the state plan, develop phase 2, implement phase 2 of the state plans, and then see where we're at. Is it good enough? If not, we'll revise the model. 2017 seems like a long way away to me, but that's the framework we're working in.
Just a question about, in Maryland, what statewide organizations are actually addressing the population problem?
I don't think there are any at all. I mean, perhaps Planned Parenthood is doing some. I don't really know.
It's a big problem.
It is a big problem, yes. So, I mean, I think that some of the environmental work that goes into the smart growth issue addresses it on the fringes. I mean, it's obviously not direct. It's obviously not as big as it needs to be. It does sort of put pressure on, making it harder to grow.
But when they had those meetings, we weren't allowed to talk about population. Remember we were putting all the Legos together and stuff?
Yeah, I don't quite remember. Yeah, that.
What meetings?
There was a process led by Thousand Friends of Maryland that is the smart growth organization more than any other, and they did this joint visioning process that how do you want the area to grow, and it's an exercise in trying to come up with a common vision, and it was quite interesting that people from all walks of life, there was a very diverse set of people that participated in that big old room at the convention center, a lot of people, and the share that you sort of averaged out everybody's vision of where they want the growth to be, and it was pretty close, and it was certainly a lot better than the status quo. So for what it was in terms of given the growth,
That was it.
given the growth, where do you want it to be? But there hasn't been a question of.
Put all the Legos in a paper boat and sail it. Isn't Friends of Maryland funded by developers?
They're funded mostly by foundations. I imagine they have some, they have some major donor, but I know it's a smaller part of their. I mean, that's the kind of group they are. They're trying to, bring a lot of people together and have the growth be smarter. None of these organizations, Environment Maryland, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, anyone on its own, we all have our niche and we work together. No one is pretending that we're solving all environmental problems. I guess the name of our organization, Environment Maryland, makes you think, well, okay, whatever is the problem with the environment, you guys solve it. You have to, you have your particular characteristics. That's why the other thing about the work we do in particular is, again, back to the citizen organizing and the broader story that we're trying to convey. And we tend to choose campaigns where there is a clear special interest opponent. The energy companies don't care about global warming, don't care so much about your pocketbook. They just want to make profit, and they lobby hard against environmental regulations. The Purdue Farms is trashing the bay for their own personal profit. That's sort of a general story we like to tell to do our gradual work to change the power dynamics and policy making overall. Population doesn't have that, right? It's not that story. So for that purpose, it does not serve us well.
I come at this both from an environmental conservation point of view, and also I've worked in the nonprofit community for many years. And it seems to me that for most of the conservation, quote, environmental organizations, the mission basically is to conserve the natural world that we live in. And if we can't attack the underlying problem, which is increasing population for whichever niche we're in, it's the increasing population that's producing the nitrogen, the phosphorus, whatever else it is, the runoff from our lawns, et cetera, and so forth. If we can't all get together and say in a unified voice, the biggest underlying problem is increasing population, then all the work that each of the organizations is doing is really for naught. So I wonder why, in essence, each organization is sort of selling its mission down the river by avoiding population because it's not popular enough to get them what they need. But if all the organizations got together in a coordinated effort and started talking about the underlying problem of population, would that not make it easier to really get to what our missions are, which is to conserve the natural world?
Well, a couple of things there. One is I'm not sure I agree that it's the only problem. And number two, you have to have a plan to win. right? If you're fighting something without a good plan to win, you're not achieving your mission either. So, is it really the only problem? No. The fact that we're using 1930s technology in septic tanks on, you know, 1 million homes around, or I don't know, 250,000 homes around the state, that's a problem, and we should fix that. The fact that we have outdated sewage treatment plants, where there's better technology that they can be fixed up with, that's a problem. We can fix that. The fact that there are all these parking lots that drain straight into a ditch that goes straight into the river, that's a problem, and we can fix that, and that will make an impact on the Chesapeake Bay. So, can we grow and still meet the limits? Yes, we can, actually. And it's kind of a cost-benefit analysis, that it would cost some money to do these measures, family planning and other things to limit population. It would also cost money to upgrade our sewage treatment plants. What's going to have the bigger bang for the buck? And then what is more practically winnable that we can actually achieve? You know, a little of both. We certainly could achieve the increased family planning and other measures as well. But all have, you know, there are competing resources, and all have some amount of benefit, and so we're picking the biggest bang for the buck to clean up the Chesapeake Bay.
Brad, great introduction, and you're beginning to get us involved in what we hope will be the lively discussion at the end. We'll turn now to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Brad.